Okay.
Oh, I see.
And thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpinka, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. Just to note that this event is being live streamed to our YouTube page, so please be aware of the webcam next to you. I'd also like to take this moment to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of The Observer by Marina Endicott and published by Knopf Canada. Thank you to Marina for being here tonight, as well as to our special guest host for the evening, Guy Vanderhaeghe. Thanks also to Aaron Bonner and Tim Armstrong from Penguin Random House Canada for working with us to create this event. Marina is the author of Good to a Fault, which won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best Book, Canada and the Caribbean, and was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, The Little Shadows, which was longlisted for the Giller and shortlisted for the Governor General's Literary Award, Close to Hugh, which was longlisted for the Giller, and The Difference, which won the Robert Craich City of Edmonton Book Prize in 2020. She has been an actor, director, playwright, and editor, and now lives in Saskatoon again. Her new book, The Observer, has been released just this month. Guy Vanderhaeghe was born in Esterhazy, Saskatchewan in 1951. His previous fiction includes A Good Man, The Last Crossing, The Englishman's Boy, Things as They Are, Homesick, My Present Age, Man Descending, and Daddy Lennon and Other Stories. Among the many awards he's received are the Governor General Awards 3 times, and for his body of work, the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Fellowship, the Writers' Trust Timothy Finley Award, and the Harbourfront Literary Prize. He has received many honors, including the Order of Canada. I will now turn things over to Marina and Guy. Please give them a warm welcome.
We thought we'd begin with a little reading from the book to kind of put things in context, and then I'll get rid of this. And we'll be able to see everybody. It's so nice to be home, you guys.
Yay.
In 1992, I went with my partner, Peter Romshaw, on his first posting with the RCMP. He was an award-winning poet and journalist, and it was absurd to me that he would want to do this job, to be this person. I can't remember her last name, but a really lovely woman called Mary, who was on the board of the touring of the Saskatchewan Playwright Center. When they gave me a goodbye party to go off into the bush, she said, "My mother always used to say that a Mountie is a good catch for a working girl." She was right. But I knew nothing about it. I couldn't. The only way to know it was to live through it. And I hope that this book offers that to readers, to live through it too. Here's from the beginning. A great comet blazed in the sky all through our first spring in Medway. One I'd never heard of, Hyakutake. Its tail hung motionless but moving for hours each night, throwing a rectangle of light through the open doorway when Hardy came home from night shift. A crazy flash of omen, a little melodramatic. Sometimes it was telling me that he would die. Sometimes I decided it was protecting him. I'm beginning to be afraid that I'll die myself, and then nobody will write all this down. This small life, one of thousands and thousands. Why does it even need to be told? Hardy's account of this time and mine could be shuffled together, interleaved, to make a fuller picture. Mine is only what I saw, mostly looking at him. His, I think, would have very little of me in it. Perhaps only from time to time I went home and Julia was there. Exactly what I hoped and worked for. Ironing his uniform shirts, I sent prayers like steam into the cloth for more protection. Sleeve, back, button front, placket front, collar, which must be perfect. Other members put their shirts on straight out of the dryer. or had them dry cleaned, but we couldn't afford that. Anyway, I wanted this task. Ironing was the only thing I could do for him, other than making something to eat when he came home at 4 a.m. Newest recruit, he was on nights almost all the time. Each night before going to bed, I went out with the dog to watch the comet. Standing in that strange radiance, I imagined what Hardy was doing, hitting somebody who'd been hitting other people. I was searching a dry gully for human remains, alone in the empty detachment, filling out forms. Maybe the senior constables had sent him up to Ridgeway for a pizza, siren blaring the whole 40 kilometers there and back. Maybe they'd all be there in the big room with desks, 6 or 7 large men horsing around. While Hardy slept during the days, I was supposed to be writing. That was not going very well. After stabbing away at the keyboard for an hour or so, garbage the whole time, I'd leave the lean-to porch we'd made into my office to walk over the hill with my old dog Trey. Or I'd get in the car and drive around the range roads trying to figure the place out. Once in a while, I took the wash over to Jeddah, officially the ugliest town in this world, and sat idling outside the laundromat, while this time I'd bargained for dribbled away. The deal was that Hardy would work and I would write for 5 years and then we'd switch. It seemed fair. Only it turned out he didn't make enough money for me to do nothing. The quarterly electricity bill came at the end of June after our first month renting a falling down farmhouse, $900, half of Hardy's monthly salary, and I couldn't pay it. It sat there beside my computer, glaring at me, making it even harder to write. So when the phone rang, I was happy to hear a voice looking for me instead of Hardy, asking if I'd be interested in editing the local paper and would I come in right away. I went in, of course. The editor met me at the door with semi-hysterical joy, older than me, fair and rumpled, with bright, snapping eyes, sizing me up. Catherine with a C, she said. Julia, I said back, with a J. She laughed the whole time I was there. She was so glad to see me. I sat across her paper-strewn desk, wondering why she seemed to think I already knew all about the job. So you can imagine how happy I was to hear you're an editor, she said. I'd never had anything to do with newspapers. I worked in theater, acting and directing, mostly as a dramaturge who wrestles with the playwright to make plays better. Maybe Hardy, realizing the RCMP wouldn't know what to make of dramaturge, he put script editor on the form, informing them who he was cohabiting with. But how would the newspaper editor have seen that form? Interesting. Catherine pushed the latest issue of the paper at me. Her annual leave was the month of August, but the guy who usually replaced her had called that morning to say he wasn't coming, not even a week's notice. Listen, I've booked a houseboat in Salmon Arm and I am going with or without a replacement, so it's the Observer's lucky day that you turned up and you'll be fine. Pay was decent, it was only for a month, how hard could it be? The joke was that Hardy had actually been a reporter before he joined the RCMP. As I was driving home from the interview, he passed me on 602 and signaled me to pull into the next turn in front of Connor's School, an old schoolhouse, now used as a community hall, shaggy with peeling yellow paint and a bedraggled swing set on one side and a baseball diamond on the other. He turned in after me, gravel spurting as he braked. We got out to walk around in the parking lot and I told him what had happened. I said I didn't think I could do it. Of course you can, he said. I'll tell you everything you need to, oh wait. Radio was buzzing fretfully inside the cruiser and he bent to talk. I shouldn't have listened, but I always did with all my ears. I needed data to figure this place out, to assess each moment's risk. Radio noise was hard to decipher, even though I'd carefully studied the 10 codes during the long months Hardy was in training. I'll be 1078 in 8 minutes, he said. Then it was all static. 1078 at detachment. He had one foot in the car already. Take it, he said. You'll be fine. It'll be fun. For the sheer pleasure of his pleasure, I would have agreed to any old job. Next morning, I found a sheet of paper on the kitchen table with a few of Hardy's journalism rules jotted down for me. Get the names right. Get on the phone. Don't be lazy. Don't be shy. Somebody out there can tell you what you need to know to write the story. Make notes. Write everything down. Either in the room or in the car before you drive away. You can't remember enough. It's not about you. That last one irritated me. Of course it wasn't about me. Did he think I was a self-absorbed baby? I folded the note and went to town. Catherine didn't have time for rules. She just spat out everything in her head as it came to her. Who to watch out for on the Medway Town Council, which RM, rural municipality, meeting was held on what day, all marked on a giant whiteboard. What had to be done for the Ag Days special? Ag Days, oh yeah, Agriculture Days. This was a country. How to grab copy from the press releases coiling constantly out of the fax machine on velvet slimy paper to fill the 24 pages of the tabloid each week. How to lay out the paper, that was a serious thing to learn. Working with wax strips, not long before they'd still been linotyping, but I missed that noisy joy. After a hard morning, we went for lunch. The only place to eat in Medway was the Lariat Cafe. Red Formica tables, Chinese Canadian cuisine, a white china cat with a raised paw at the cash. I'd been there before, of course. It was the only place to eat. Lanny, the owner, greeted Catherine with national happiness, but didn't recognize me without Hardy, who was there already, sitting with Mason and Ken in the last booth. The three of them took out all the room. Hardy took up all my eyes. I loved the great bound my heart gave whenever I saw him unexpectedly. Spotting them, Catherine pulled me along the visit. Mason and Ken had lots of news, good, but she wanted to tell Hardy how happy she was to make my acquaintance, even more than his. Cub reporter to the rescue, he said, smiling back at Catherine. Hardy's an actual journalist, I said. He was a sports reporter for the Yorkton paper before he went into training. He's the only reason I dared to take this job. He shook his head, slid along the booth to stand, and put an arm around me briefly, not officially allowed, since he was in uniform. He must have been glad to see me too.
Thank you very much for that, Marina. First of all, congratulations on this very, very fine novel, which I believe had a long gestation. Because I think that you approached some of the material in this novel in a long poem.
Yes, I did.
How many years ago was that?
I'll have to count it from the beginning because I actually got an Alberta Foundation for the Arts grant to write this book when we were still in Marythorpe. So in 1997, I had a grant. The Alberta, maybe some of you are from Alberta. The problem with Alberta is that when you get a grant there, they make you send the manuscript in to prove you actually did the work. It's barbaric.
Are you going to send it to them then?
I was. I actually thanked him in the acknowledgements, but I did send him something, but it was so terrible. I don't even want to go into how bad it was, but it was really terrible. I changed the page numbers so it would look a bit longer and said, I'm sending you selections from the manuscript. So it was that. And then, yes, I wrote poetry about it and that would have been in about 2000, around 2000. But I had been working on them for a long time before I actually sent them to the CBC.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that many writers have something that asks or insists to be written. And it seems that maybe this was an insistence. So could you tell us a little something about the background to the story? What was the germ for the creation of the novel?
So it's difficult to kind of sometimes draw a line between fiction and memoir, and this is definitely fiction, but it is definitely based on what I experienced going with my husband, my now husband, to his first posting with the RCMP. And I think that the insistence on, I like that, I think that's really true. It comes out in various ways. And the insistence for this story was that feeling of difference, of the place where we were being so entirely like anything I'd ever experienced before. And it seemed to me so much like anything anybody I knew could understand or experience. And that it was almost incumbent to try and tell that experience so that other people could understand it better than I had ever been able to understand. And the difficulty over those long years was really trying to find a way to tell that story without it becoming, self-involved or boring or just trying to find a way to enter the story properly. I also wrote, and I'm sure you wouldn't know this, but I was contracted to write a adult reader by that small.
I read that.
Did you read it?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, I tried 6 or 7 different modes for that because they have all these rules, like you can't use words of more than 1 syllable unless it's cigarette or government. That's what the form says. I thought, oh my God, look at the buried contempt in there. So I was hating the contract. But then I thought, here's a place where I could use nobody talks fancy there. Nobody's trying to make you understand how intellectual they are. They're just living. And I could use the vocabulary and the life there to write about that place. And I think that was the one bit I wrote that I thought maybe it's getting a little close to it.
Well, it's interesting. The narrator's name is Julia. The novel's in the first person. And Julia, the title has several meanings. First of all, the observer is the name of the paper that she works for, but she also makes a statement about herself as being an observer. So that in the novel, you can see her edging her way into the community and fitting into it, making friends with women in the town, but she also stands apart. There's a kind of distance to her reflections on the community. So, in fact, you've already anticipated some of the things that I was going to ask you about. The first person narrator writes in a very simple style, very effective. I think it's hard to write a plain style in a simple style effectively. It's harder to write that than a more ornate, showy style. So I'm always interested in writers' conscious and unconscious decisions. So I have two writerly questions to ask.
I love a writerly question.
So the decision about the first person narration, was that narrator, was that conscious or was it unconscious? And was the choice of the style conscious or unconscious? Or maybe both. It's a mingling of those things.
I'm so semi-conscious all the time that really it could go either way. That's such a good question. Was it conscious or unconscious to use a first-person narration? But I think it was conscious. But I also think that unconsciously it had been pushed on me for many years. I tried writing about it not in first person, and I was unable to get close enough to it to do that. And the question about the style was, yes, absolutely conscious. And as you probably know, it's really not what I do most often. I love a fancy style. I love using big words, and I love fancying language and period language and all that sort of stuff. I really, really enjoy it. But I felt that it was very important to find a plain, peeled away, pared down way to talk about this story. And I had this little square yellow sticky on my computer while I was writing it. It said, "Don't lie." And it was I needed that reminder every day to just take away the stuff that was fancy, that was overboard, that was made up, that was nonsense, or was just embellishing, was stretching things. I was trying to pare it all down.
One of the interesting things that I found about the book, which was fascinating for me, is that here's a huge generalization, but most novels about the police tend to actually focus really intensely on what
On
the
the
police,
police.
on the police and what the police do. I mean, I'm dating myself. If
Maybe
you look
rightly
at somebody
so.
like Joseph Wambaugh, you know,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
New Centurions or
Field,
whatever,
yeah.
it's the police procedures and basically, you know, capturing the criminal and all the rest of it. This novel is about the domestic life of the police as seen through Julia's eyes.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I think that it's very important because it does humanize the police in a way that, despite the best attempts, I sometimes think that the male-oriented view or gaze of police tends to fall into kind of a false heroism, and almost forgets that the police too have a life outside of what the job they do. Now, the job that they do probably affects their lives in ways that many jobs don't. So again, I mean, the question is, perhaps you could do it no other way, right? But did you feel the importance of how you were approaching the material in the novel? I mean, did you feel as if you were doing something different or new, or in a way slightly radical?
Well, I'm really happy to hear that because I didn't. I thought I was doing it maybe the only way I could do it because for two things. One, because I was not the police and I don't know enough to be able to write it, to write the police part of this life. And even though I watched carefully and listened, I still don't know what it's like to drive a car the wrong way up the Yellowhead for 50 miles. I don't know any of that stuff. All I know is what happens when the person comes home. But also, I'm glad to hear that it's radical. That makes me feel really good, actually, because it seemed very, very small and ordinary to me as I was writing it. But maybe that's part of the sort of self-hypnosis that we do so that we can get something written.
But I think that's what's radical about it, is that it's a book about ordinary decency, at least in my mind. I'm sure you have very different ideas about what the book may be.
I think that's a good thing for it to be about.
But
yeah.
But it is about, it seems to be about a couple who are faced with the question of doing a very, very difficult job, which creates all kinds of tensions and stresses, and yet how diligently they work to overcome them. And especially Julia, since it's told from her point of view,
Yeah.
right?
You see all my work. Julius.
Yeah. The fact that Julia is so steadfast in a few guiding principles in her life and in family life. And I don't know that, you know, there aren't many people writing novels like that anymore. I mean, I've often said that I think E.M. Forster and Willa Cather are the two writers who can write about decency and goodness convincingly. And one of the things about your book was that I thought that was one of the real achievements of the book. It was about dailiness and how people get through difficult circumstances.
Well, I'm really happy that you see decency here, and I do too. The decency that I was aware of while I was writing it. And I totally didn't begin this thinking, oh, I'm going to take it on myself to write about, you know, how decent these police that I knew were. But that's what emerged as I wrote and that's one of the things that really surprised me when I was finally able to actually write the book, was to go through the things that I knew and the things that I had seen and the things, and of course, change them and make them up and, you know, substitute and applique, put things together, but I was surprised over and over again that I wasn't finding more venal, more unpleasantness. I was looking mostly at people who were, for good reasons, doing as good a job as they possibly could in horrible circumstances for a long time without giving up on it. So I'm really glad that decency is there. I think, it may be a flaw in the book that if you're seeing Julia as being really decent, that may be just like, I forgot to put that part in but there's a moment. I sent the book to an RCMP spouse of mine to read, and I was really scared about what she would think. She wrote back, saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you did this. What are you thinking? How are you going to read from this? This is crazy." But she also said, I love the part where Julia, they have a big fight at a party one night. It's a very quiet fight and nobody would know they were fighting, but she knows that they're fighting. They're really fighting. And she gets really, really mad. And she says, "I'm stuck here in the bush with these oblivious monsters. And I can't leave them now because then I'll be a single mother and I'll still have the mortgage." There probably should have been about 11 more scenes like that if I'd been.
Well, I mean, one of the things is like, the first person narration, it's very intimate, right? And when Julia confesses something, it sticks with you.
Yeah,
Like,
that's so neat.
At one point, she says about Hardy, when things are not going as smoothly as they might be going, she says, "I used to think that if he died, I couldn't live." I'm paraphrasing now.
That's basically it.
Yeah, and then she says, "And now I know I could." Right?
Yeah.
If he was gone, I could keep going.
It's a really important little epiphany of hers, I think, and she gets to it by observing another RCMP wife who says that to her. I've come to realize that, if I had to be without him, I could do it. And I was so shocked when that woman, my friend, said it to me, and yet, then when Julia, I'm the only real person in this, nobody else is at all real. But when Julia thinks, "Oh yeah, I get it, that's right." I think that's an important thing for her it's sort of a freeing thing where you can decide to stay because you decide to, not because you have to or you die.
Because you're afraid that you can't exist except in these circumstances. I mean, there's so many things that I found impressive about this novel, but I mean, one of the things was I kept on thinking there's a character called Johnny Mayer in the novel, who's, I think if you grew up in a small town, every small town had somebody who was more or less like Johnny Mayer. Johnny Mayer hates the cops. He's obviously got a screw loose. He's a very dangerous individual. He's threatened the police. He goes to the Observer, the newspaper. He wants them to publish a rant against the police. And there's this slowly building ominousness in the novel where when Julia's alone at night, she can hear someone moving outside. There's a man who's keeping bees on their acreage. The beehives are vandalized. There's a whole series of things that I think in the hands of a lesser novelist would have ended in a cataclysmic bloodbath of one kind or other. There is a bloodbath, but it's an
There's the blood.
yeah. But it's an off the scene bloodbath that almost comes as a postscript. It has huge consequences for the town and for the police and everything else. Now I'm assuming, again, maybe this is the autobiographical fallacy, that you're actually looking at what happened in Mayerthorpe, Alberta, where there were a number of police who were killed by a man with a huge grievance against the police. What role do you think that, in your mind, Johnny Mayer plays in the novel? I'm not saying the old sort of symbol thing,
No, of
right?
course not.
That he's a symbol of evil or something as straightforwardly banal as that. But what does he mean for the novel, do you think?
I hope that what he does in the novel is what you said, that there's at least one person with a screw loose, person who's trouble in every community. And I hope that he's not obviously going to cause a bloodbath. It's not, he's ominous. We're scared of him. Julia's terrified of him when he comes into the police station. She worries about him. But there's lots of other things to be worried about. He's not the focus, in fact.
Arson.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all kinds of other things going on, and he's not really a big, plot mover. He's just part of what the police are contending with all the time. And I guess what I'm reaching for in the book is that they don't know. They would have no reason to know. Here's the person who's going to cause this terrible tragedy later. They're just dealing with everybody, and any one of those 11 people that they're worried about, 14 other people who are possible, bad guys, 15 people who just got out of jail. Any one of those people could be the tinderbox, but you just don't know which one. And so I wanted you to carry that ominousness with you, but also to be worried about other things like the arson and what's going on with that. And yet I didn't really want it to be a Joseph Wambaugh, police procedural, as you say, because that's not what they're living really.
I guess one of the questions I'm asking is that this is part of the texture of the novel about what seems to me what the business of the police often is. At one point in the novel, Julia says, I think it's something 10 days and 11 bodies, because there's been a horrendous car crash. And one of the things that Hardy finds the hardest thing to do is to actually give bad news to families. That you have to go to a house and say your husband, your wife, your child, whatever, has been killed in an accident, and this has to be done personally, and it has to be delivered personally. And that's the kind of thing that I think would be like enormously difficult to do. But it's part of the job description.
And not, of course, just Hardy, but the woman constable has a breakdown after doing one of those visits to a woman to tell her husband has died.
And I one of the things that about the book is that it seems to me the police are often in bad odor, right?
Yeah.
and there are reasons for the police being in bad odor, but the question that I think that this book raises is, how do we ask people to do a job this difficult and remain human, and how do they do it? And one of the things in the book is that Hardy receives support in terms of psychological counseling, leave, and the question of police suicide bulks very largely in this book, because there's a woman who's a widow because her husband committed suicide. I guess it's part of the thing that we need our attention to be brought to as readers.
I wrote a thing in the Globe and Mail a couple of weekends ago, and that was a hard thing to write. The publisher says, you should do this thing, it'll be really good. And you go, okay, fine. And when I wrote the book, like I can't write another thing. It took me 30 years to write the, did you notice how long? So I had to write this op-ed thing. And one of the things that was actually a really useful exercise, much as I resisted it and, pounded the desk and wept upstairs. But one of the things that I end up saying at the end of that is that this is, we need to look at the machinery that grinds up the police and the policed, what we're asking people to do, that they are doing this thing where every day it's somebody's worst day. That's where they are every day. Somebody is in the worst day of their lives every day, and that's who they're dealing with. And somebody's dying or almost dead or is, already dead. And these are the things that as a society we're putting on these people, and that's the job we're asking them to do. And yes, how do we ask them to keep doing it and doing it and doing it and not stop, not give in?
When I think of Julia, I think of the life that she's leading that is in many ways very, very foreign to her. I mean, we've already touched briefly on the idea of the observer, someone who doesn't quite fit in. And one of the things that she's done is that she's a city girl. She's a woman who's been involved in the arts, drama. She's given up what she calls her dream job, to follow Hardy with his job. She does brief stints like at BAM for doing workshops. She jumps around doing all kinds of jobs, substitute teaching, working as an editor at the newspaper.
Writing somebody's biography.
Writing,
terrible old movies.
Potted biographies.
Same snake.
All of those kinds of things. Yet the remarkable thing about Julie as a character for me is that she's not constantly bitching about her life, right? Like she's not constantly saying, I've consciously martyred myself, right? and I regret it. She's not a person who walks around saying, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. I mean, she does say, woe is me. We don't say woe is me. I think.
Remember that monster, oblivious, stuck in the woods. Yeah,
right. But for me, that's again one of the interesting. One of why I find her an interesting character is that she doesn't do what every reader might predict a woman in her position would do.
Number one, she is really lucky because she really loves Hardy. I don't know where that comes from. Number two, though, and this was a real surprise to me as I was working through the book, but I think what she gains there is more than she expected. She gains the world. She gains this living in the country thing that she has never done, and this I think that sudden understanding or sudden gift of the natural world really, really sustains her. And then she gets this crazily unexpected gift of a child that she never expected to have. You? Okay, you come.
No, well, no, I mean, one of the things is that Julie doesn't think that she can have a child.
Yeah.
Then unexpectedly, she has a child. Well, doesn't first she finds out she's pregnant.
It's not like that TV show. Remember that TV show where there was like week after week 20 people who didn't know they were pregnant?
Yeah. No. She's surprised to find herself.
She's surprised, pregnant.
And there's a line that when she tells Hardy, it's like a devastating line, right? What is it?
Oh, well, she freaks out because they had kind of worked through this and they were not having kids and that was okay. We were going to do that because she couldn't. And then she's right there, she's pregnant and he's away and she can't tell him and he's not there, like for 3 weeks, he's still not there. And she can't tell him over the phone and then he gets home and she can't tell him in real life. And so she bakes a batch of cookies. I hate to tell you this, but this is true. With alphabet letters and spells out a line from Rilke.
Just change your life.
You must change your life. And somehow in her madness believes that actually giving somebody a plate of cookies that says you must change your life is going to instantly inform them that they're about to become a father. But of course, it doesn't work. And she still has to tell him. And he says, now I can never quit my job.
Then she's told by Hardy's psychiatrist that it would create too much stress if she were to have another child. She discovers she's pregnant again. And she tells Hardy that she's pregnant, and then what happens?
But then he is just uplifted.
Yeah.
Because
She's uplifted and elated.
yes,
So it's
says,
this,
"What?"
it's this strange thing about expectations,
Mhm.
right? And how they reverse. And what was assumed would be bad for Hardy is good for
It's very
Hardy.
good. That's right.
And maybe in the first instance, what she had thought, you must change your life, which would be kind of like uplifting for Hardy. He says the wrong thing.
In that split second, in that instant of first like shock, that's when that comes. It's not that, instantly. But I think it's often harder for men to kind of wrangle with what's going on because it's not happening inside their own bodies. But I so many times when I was writing this and going back through things that I thought I remembered, but going back through them as fiction and trying to understand differently what was happening, I understood more about what I was doing. And so when the doctor says, I don't think that's a good idea, I was sort of shocked to see how much I disapproved of him saying that. Now looking back, how could he have said such a stupid thing, really? And earlier he says something else that she also thinks is really just incredibly stupid. And so Julia is wiser than I ever was, really. She gets those understandings a little faster than I did. 30 years for me.
Well, keeping an eye on the clock because I'm supposed to. Was there another short little piece that you wanted to read?
Yeah.
And then maybe you
read
could field questions from the audience.
I was going to read from further along in the book, and this is just a moment of what the life is like night by night. I just like this scene a lot. And of course, people aren't supposed to say that about their own books, so you're free to disagree. One dim September dawn, Hardy woke me up, or tried to. He set a coffee on the bedside table for me. I looked at the clock with one eye half open. 5 a.m. He went around to sit on his side, hands on elbows, shielding his eyes. You okay? The bed shifted as he shifted. I was driving some guy. Give a short laugh. This was a bad guy. After an incident, anyway, he needed a ride out to the old Esso, so I'm taking out the back road, and his arms reached out and flew together silently, and he smacked his hands to his forehead, knocking his head back against the bedpost. Wham! A huge owl flies into the windshield. I was awake now. Are you okay? Oh yeah, but the owl was toast. It took half the light bar off the cruiser. The guy in the back says, all perturbed, that was an owl. But there's nothing to be done. I dropped the guy off and go back to town. What's left of the light bar hanging by the wires. I'm getting more and more worried. I killed an owl. This is really bad. Everybody knows that. I'm doomed and my family is probably cursed. I reached blindly for my coffee. So I'm freaking out, but who do I ask? I can't go back to the reserve. I got to get to the office. When I get to, driving by Gord's place, when I get to town, his lights are all on. It's 2 a.m. So I go knock on the door. I just need to know, here's what's happened. Am I in a world of hurt? Gord Fontaine, you'd know him to see him. He's Allison's uncle, not the one with Down syndrome, the older one. They don't live on the reserve. They're not Stony or Cree either, but maybe Soto. Lights are on anyway, and I know he'll help me. There's all kinds of rules about asking questions, like should I bring tobacco if I'm turning up at somebody's house in the middle of the night? Anyway, Gord listens, goes to ask his mom. They're having dinner. Out she comes. She says something to Gord. They talk for a while. He says to me, okay, did the owl die? You sure about that? And I say, it definitely died. It took the light bar off my car. His mom looks me over and kind of shrugs, and then she tells Gord something, and he says to me, well, you were lucky. She thinks you're probably going to be okay. That was it. That was it. He got under the covers, still thrumming with nervous energy. But for all I know, they closed the door after I left and said, oh man, he's really screwed.
So I'm not going to mediate this, but if you want to invite questions from the audience.
I invite questions from the audience. Dave.
During this conversation, I kept thinking back to a very sophisticated woman who's living in an isolated community and writing about her husband, whom she loves a great deal. I was thinking of Mrs. Bentley. I was thinking about Esther in my house. Did it ever occur to you that you might be writing part of that sort of tradition, or looking back?
You can't escape it. So yes, it did. But my mother was a minister's wife. So I've always kind of assigned Mrs. Bentley to my mom. So I was not allowed to be Mrs. Bentley. But I've also always felt just a little bit impatient with Mrs. Bentley, actually. I think she probably was at least as deep in depression as poor Mr. Bentley. And she's not a model for me for so many reasons. She's my mother, but also the way that she and Bentley interact always seemed really unsympathetic, like not even unsympathetic, unempathetic to me. Although I know, of course, and I think the book is amazing. Lee Gowan wrote a book this last year that was a take on As For Me in My House, and I loved what he did with it. But I consciously was steering away from what I had felt was not dishonest, but not the relationship that I was trying to. I think that so many people have looked at that relationship and tried to parse it and see why it's so bad. But none of the things that they've ever suggested were operating in the relationship between Julia and Hardy, who actually have, I think, a very strong and sustaining relationship inside these circumstances that are really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm expecting Guy to leap in, but he just reneged. Anybody else have a question? Oh, lots. Rod.
Did you keep a journal in those years, Marina, and how useful?
I did, and Julia talks about that in one point. She says, I wrote things down, but they were mostly just how mad I was at Hardy, so I threw them away. And mostly that's true. I did go back a couple of times, and once or twice I found something I could use, and other times I found that it was mostly garbage. Almost on purpose, as a kind of a way to flush out things you don't need or are stressing over that are not important. But what I did have, and this is thanks to my wonderful mother-in-law who's here tonight, Violet Ormshaw, I had the paper because we were there for all those years, and I gave her a subscription to the paper, and so she kept them. So I went back and read all the papers is what I did. And wow, is that ever useful? So a lot of the things that memory had either rubbed away or we had closed the door on those things, when I read the papers, that was opened back up again, and I remembered people and things and events that I would not have remembered otherwise. So that was incredibly useful, and maybe you know, a little bit more objective than my journals would have been, which were mostly, how dared he say that to me, or you know, is he ever going to not work? I don't think so, or whatever selfish thing I was thinking at the time. You had a question back there?
You started this so many years ago, and in the interim, you've had all these other stories that you've done. How do you kind of set all this aside, or does it just ride around in your head and you have to kind of push it away so you can concentrate on the other books?
Well, you know, a central part of the book really is PTSD and what that does to families. And one of the things that people do to cope with that is to put it away, put a lid on it. And so we had put a pretty firm, you know, a real cedar chest lid on a lot of what I dredged up as I was beginning to remember. And so it wasn't consciously riding along with me, because I was, you know, enjoying writing other books and thinking about other things. And of course, having other life experiences. This is just a short period. But I think maybe it was percolating as I lived longer. But I often find that, you know, just day to day, when writing a book, I have to wait till Thursday when I get a little smarter and can remember can fix something or realize or remember something, or, you know. So I think there is a sort of an underground, deep underground subconscious train that's been chugging along all this time, yeah. But on the surface, I was not really aware of it, except that, you know, every little while there'd be a little lava glow, and I'd think, oh, I should really write about that. Oh, I'll write an essay, or oh no, I'll write a radio play, some poems. Yeah, let's write some poems. But I'm often writing not just one thing at a time. Are you doing that too?
I have to turn that mic back on. Excuse me. Very seldom.
You concentrate on one thing.
I'm not a good multiple tasker. There were times when if somebody offered me money to write something, I would stop what I was working on.
That's the Satan part.
Yeah, that's the same part.
Yeah.
I would do that, but I prefer to just stay with my thing.
Yeah, that's a lovely thing to be able to do. When I wrote Good to a Fault, it surprisingly did very well, and that was wonderful for lots of reasons. But one of the greatest things was that I was able to just work on my next novel for a couple of years. And wow, was that ever great? And I wrote it so fast compared to normally. I mean, Good to a Fault took about 12 years, this one 30. And Little Shadows I wrote like from beginning to end in about 3 years, which is really unusual for me, but mostly more. I know there was another question over here. I'd like to do a little shout out to a couple of people. One is Glenda McFarlane, who's here sitting in the front row, who does not appear in the book as yourself, but she and Jeff Martell, who couldn't be here tonight, but whose wife Karen Martell is sitting beside Glenda, they were the people who came and did the newspaper when I was gone, and just saved my life a couple of times where I needed to go to Banff or to somewhere. And you guys, thank you so much for Glenda, what you did when it was needed.
Making some spectacular mistakes along the way.
And that was good too, because then I could see how somebody else could screw up as badly as I had. I screwed up very badly at the paper. Anybody else? Yes, Steve.
Hi,
How nice to see you.
nice to see you too. Congratulations. I just loved the Little Shadows in particular.
Oh, thank you.
Loved it. So I have actually, if I can remember them, 2 questions. The first, kind of writerly, about dialogue. And I'm curious about how you approach writing dialogue in a novel as opposed to, say, writing dialogue for a radio play or a stage play or something like that. And the second question is about choosing form. You had this story to tell. So why did you decide to turn it into a piece of fiction?
Two brilliant questions. The dialogue one, you know, I don't have any advice re dialogue, and I've thought about that a lot and tried to. I mean, I worked as an actor for a long time, and I wrote a couple of plays. And I guess that from time to time when dialogue's going really badly, I try to apply kind of theatrical, make it active kind of ideas. But really, I think really the dialogue and making it better is a question of listening to people talking it, just listening to how they actually talk, practicing writing it down and seeing what they leave out and how they construct sentences in speech that they wouldn't do if they were writing it down, and then taking away as much as you possibly can.
Right.
And why not a memoir is really linked to that little sticky saying, don't lie. Some people are so good at memoir and I really admire that, but I find memoir unnatural to me. I have to really work hard not to lie when I'm writing memoir, and it's unconscious. I look back over a page and realize I've embellished this and I've changed that thing, and it's a real hard discipline for me to write memoir, although I really admire it and wish I could do more of it. But when I'm writing fiction, I can say, okay, that is as true as I could make it. It's just it seems like people have some bent, one bent or another, and my bent is really to try that it's easier to tell what's true in fiction. Is there a question back there? I thought I saw it. It's so hard to ask questions. Don't you have any other questions to ask me?
Well,
I'll say something to you though.
I think we're quite close to the
Okay.
end, so.
Well, let me just say though, that when I went off to Mayerthorpe, not knowing anything about the police or anything about small towns or anything about really basically anything, let's face it. One of the things that really, really helped me was your play. I had a job I liked once, which I saw at Persephone, maybe like before there was any idea of Peter joining the police. And it stuck with me so well, and so many things in that play, so many moments in that play came back to me as I was writing this book. And one of the moments that I really loved in the play and that really rang true for me was when the sergeant says, I just got to stop you for a second. I just have to call my wife. Mm-hmm. She worries if I don't call. And that was, those words rang in my head when we were in Mayerthorpe and ever since. There were no cell phones. There was no, you couldn't call a car and know where the car was. There was no GPS. So somebody would just be gone for, Peter would be gone for, 23 hours. And I would have no idea. I would just have to trust that, he's going to call me when he can. Nothing can be done. Yes.
No, thank you. And thank you for your reading. And thank you for this book.
Thank you so much.
I'll just say a quick word before I let you go. I'd like to thank Marina and Guy again for being with us tonight. We have copies of The Observer on the desks to your right, and if you'd like your copy signed or if you'd like to say hello, Marina will be happy to meet you at the signing table up here. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
I was so happy when I